The Mega Furry Fandom Iceberg Explained. Hello all, and welcome to the second layer of this massive furry fandom iceberg that we're working on. Yes, despite the title, this is part 2. But don't worry, the titling is partially to make this whole thing less intimidating to newcomers, and because, frankly, each layer of this iceberg is fairly accessible as its own project. So, if you'd like some more surface-level material than what we'll be getting into today, particularly relating to gateway fandoms and parallel fandoms to furry that exist in normie culture, check out the video in the card right now. Otherwise, if you want to check that one out later, hello, my name is Princess Dank, the striped yin with a daily growing interest in the history of the furry fandom. So, let's not have a long intro here. Sit back, relax, and let's dive into another, or maybe your first, layer of this mammoth furry fandom iceberg. Beastars. Beastars was originally a manga by Paru Itagaki, which ran from 2016 to 2020. It was adapted in 2019 by the studio Orange, a Japanese CG studio founded in 2004. The CG anime adaptation aired on Fuji TV and was brought to the English-speaking world in 2020 by Netflix. The second season premiered in 2021, with a third and final season to be released probably in 2024, as far as I can tell. The story follows a group of anthropomorphic herbivore and carnivore animals attending Cherryton Academy. In this world, eating meat is illegal. The main character is Legoshi, a wolf in the University Drama Club, alongside Lewis, a red deer. An herbivore is murdered, leading to widespread suspicion of the carnivores in the area. After this, Legoshi meets Haru, a rabbit who has feelings for Lewis, and Legoshi starts having feelings for her. The series is notable for how it bridged the furry weeb gap. I specifically remember a friend from Japanese class watching this when it was current and starting to feel things about anthro characters. It was part of a 1-2, arguably 3 punch from around this time that we'll be getting into in just a little bit here. Hybrids. A hybrid is an animal species which combines multiple existing species into one. They've existed since basically ancient history, with the likes of the Minotaur, the Chimera, the Griffin, the Hippogriff, and more recently the Jackalope. They're also known in modern history with the existence of species like ligers, taigons, mules, and so on. In the furry fandom specifically, they're common as a way to have a unique fursona, with some more common hybrid species being fox wolves, wolf dragons, and some others. They're also used to combine vastly different species, like a herp and a mammal, or a bird and a mammal, or a bird and a fish. For this reason, hybrids are super popular for creative expression with one's fursona. Original species. Where hybrids are typically composed of 2 or more existing species of animals, original species are more or less completely fabricated, meaning that while they might be partially based on an existing species or multiple, they are, in a lot of cases, an original concept. They're super popular in the fandom in terms of people using them for their fursonas. Where a hybrid species in ancient mythology might bring something to mind like a chimera, where it's a bunch of different parts of already existing real creatures, here you might have something like a hydra or a kraken, where you can kind of see how it's based on stuff from the real world, but in a lot of cases this is just purely a mythological creature. Take that context and apply it to modern day, and you've basically got the idea of an original species. There are many popular original species within the furry fandom, some of which we'll be getting into specifically later. Those include Avali, Protogens, Taidums, Wicker Beasts, Dutch Angel Dragons, and so many more. These are just some of the more popular ones, for reference. Many original species will have rules for creating characters using that species, and some are open to anyone, while others have to be specifically approved by or bought from the creators of said original species. Think of this as a step beyond an original character, with many original species creators not just delving into the look of the species, but their diet, language, home planet or biome, and so much lore. Open species. An open species is an original species which the creator have made allowances for, meaning that anyone with an interest in them can create a member of that species and use it freely as their Sona. Again, many open species still have rules to create some sort of cohesion for the species as a whole. This might include requiring or disallowing certain types of body parts. All species mentioned in the previous entry are open species, leading to their huge proliferation on social media, in fursuiting, artwork, and so on. Some even go so far as allowing sale of original characters created in an open species, with sets of rules on their sites. See Dutch Angel Dragons, for instance. If you're stuck picking a Sona and you want something more exotic than a boring old earth animal, just Google open species furry and you'll find a plethora of little boingy boofs to choose from. Species listed before are probably the most popular open species, with perhaps the biggest right now being Protogens, to the point that the quote-unquote illegal Protogen has become a massive meme. This being a Protogen that doesn't exactly follow the rules set out by its creator. Monster girls. A monster girl is a girl who is also a monster. They're popular in anime and manga, specifically in titles like Monster Musume and Monster Girl Encyclopedia. This is kind of a callback to the Cat Girls entry on Layer 1, where Neko Musume means cat daughter, but it's often translated as cat girl. Same here. Monster Musume means monster daughter, but the English term is typically monster girl. Once again, this is actually something that throws basically all the way back to ancient history. You've got Medusa, Scylla, and plenty of other women who were basically monster girls. Often, monster girls have powers associated with their corresponding monster, like a vampire, or a troll, or a snake. However, usually they have more human elements than a full-on anthro character. They have some crossover with furry thanks to the kind of blurry line between anthro and monster. They also share some more nebulous crossover with furry because monster girls are often purely understood through a sexual context by people who aren't into them. Though this obviously isn't always the case, basically just like furry. COVID vaccine / Chise. Chise is a molecular biologist pine marten who helped develop the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine, but more typically works on influenza vaccines. She received the 2022 NIH Director's Award for further work on the Omicron variant vaccine. She's perhaps most well known for, in 2021 and 2022, directly engaging with doomers, anti-vaxxers, and others of their ilk on Twitter to spread true information about COVID and the vaccines available for it. In other words, she got popular for debunking pessimists and deniers alike. A lot of these communications and the discourse that has happened around them since they occurred put a really big focus on how difficult and bottlenecked communication can be on social media, especially with regards to more nuanced or previously unheard of topics like COVID. But Chise gained a following for her ability to concisely cut through a lot of her detractors' claims and explain things in plain English, though others have taken issue with her tweets' lack of nuance. Though, of course, that's just describing social media in general, let's be honest. YCH. The term YCH stands for Your Character Here. Once again, this is a concept that's not explicitly limited to furry, but is super popular within furry. YCHs are either sold at a static price or are auctioned off, and each of them contains an outline of a character which is replaced with, well, your character. Hence, Your Character Here. These pictures are often single character portraits, but sometimes they'll be scenes with multiple characters together. They're typically a static pose and scenario, but the central focus becomes whoever you put in it. Generally, these are some of the cheaper commissions that are out there, though naturally this varies from artist to artist. Alternatively, YCHs are also known as TCBYs, or This Could Be You. Now I want yogurt. It can be pretty cool to see your Fursona side by side with a bunch of others, or just in a scenario that you think really represents their persona. Yiff. Okay, this one is, Yiff is the furry term for doing it. In the same way that the verb can be a noun or a verb, so can Yiff. The term originated on Furry Muck, which, don't worry, we'll get there, where Foxen, now known as Revar, was working on a vocabulary for foxes, known as foxish. Originally, in Foxish, Yiff was used to signify a positive greeting or an affirmative response, but over time, the term transitioned into meaning sex. Additionally, Foxen borrowed the term yarf from the zine of the same name for the Foxish vocabulary, and coined the term yerf, which was later used for a website. Basically everything I just said.
More on that later.
Many still argue how and when the term Yiff exactly moved from this meaning to meaning sex. So maybe that's something to look into another time, as it still seems pretty contentious. Today it's used to describe either furry porn or the act of sex as a noun or a verb, and it's become a fundamental component of a particular anti-furry phrase that we'll also be seeing on this layer. Don Bluth. Born 1937, Don Bluth is an influential animator and animation director responsible for The Secret of Nim, An American Tale, though not its sequel, All Dogs Go to Heaven, The Pebble and the Penguin, Anastasia, Titan AE, The Land Before Time, and others. It was interesting to me to find out that Don Bluth wasn't associated with Fievel Goes West, the American Tale sequel, because I grew up with that film way more than I did the original. The sequel was created by Amblimation, Steven Spielberg's pre-DreamWorks animation studio, if you recall from the previous layer. Also, Don Bluth went uncredited on The Pebble and the Penguin with co-director Gary Goldman, in protest over studio meddling, which, again, this movie was a pretty big part of my childhood, so it was interesting to find out how much he didn't like the finished product. The majority of Don Bluth's films in the 1990s were considered flops, both critically and financially, with Titan AE being his most recent film released theatrically. However, while those might have been some furry projects, his furry contributions started considerably earlier, as an animator at Disney who began work with Robin Hood, and continuing on with some of their other important furry projects through the 70s, up to The Fox and the Hound in 1981. He's also notable for his works on Dragon's Lair and its sequels, and with his own studio, Don Bluth Productions, founded in 1979. The studio changed its name multiple times until declaring bankruptcy in 1995. Don Bluth is notable in furry not just because of his work at Disney, but because the vast majority of his films were more or less furry-based, and served as the basis for a lot of people's introductions to the fandom over the years. Furry Amino. Okay, I might be a little out of my depth here, but let me see how well I can describe this, because I've never exactly used Amino. Basically, Amino is a social media website/app first launched in 2012, designed to be a digital convention-like community, according to Tech Week. Amino is kind of notorious for having a pretty young user base, and it's often brought up in a sort of derogatory way for that reason. Basically, it's somewhat similar to Reddit in that people can create communities based around a shared interest, though, as far as I know, that's where the similarity stops. In this specific case, we're talking about the community Furry Amino, which currently has more than 540,000 members, features a wiki full of furry and furry-adjacent info, polls, quizzes, and, of course, image and text posts by members. Furry Amino in particular was created in June 2016 by Lipa Slied, who, as far as I can tell, is no longer attached to the community. This specific Amino community is notable for introducing Gen Z, and probably Gen Alpha at this point, to furry. Though, admittedly, this is the first year when the oldest Gen Alpha kids could legally join Amino. It's also notable because Furry Amino is a strictly safe for work community that is explicitly for ages 13 and up. So, naturally, a lot of kids have probably been introduced to furry via Furry Amino. Virtual conventions. The virtual convention is a concept which expanded in popularity due to the global outbreak of COVID-19 and the lockdowns that followed in early 2020. Thanks to the closure of IRL FurCons in 2020 and for several years after, many moved to online venues. In particular, Twitch, Discord, Zoom, and in some cases Minecraft, and probably most prominently, though not most commonly, VRChat, which we'll be getting to in just a little bit. Surprisingly, the first of these VR cons was Japan Meeting of Furries 2020, which happened in VRChat on January 10th through 12th, 2020. Many conventions that were deferred due to COVID had an online component in 2020, if not also 2021 and beyond. though new conventions popped up using virtual means solely as well. A few dozen virtual conventions are happening per year consistently now, even with in-person cons going back into being. However, little may you know, virtual conventions go back as far as August 2006, with AC in SL, or Anthrocon in Second Life. While the Wikifur talk page for this one indicates it may not have even happened, we do know that in December 2006, a similar convention named SliderCon was held in Second Life, this one being a virtual version of an otherwise IRL furry meetup held by the Lake Area Furry Friends, with its name being in reference to its typical occurrence at White Castle after bowling events held by LAFF. For the first decade or so of virtual cons, the few that happened were mostly in Second Life, except for HomeCon, a virtual convention held on the streaming service Tiger Dial between 2012 and 2017. Closed species. The closed species is the counterpart to the open species we discussed earlier. It's an original species which is limited to being purchased from or created by only specific people. Where open species may be made by anyone as long as they follow the rules of that species, closed species are restricted far more heavily. They're a bit of a contentious topic, with people questioning whether copyright even applies to closed species, because as far as I understand, you can't copyright a feature. It has to be a completely original idea. And I think that's where a lot of people take issue with the idea of closed species. In a lot of cases, we're talking about fairly recognizable animals, just with new features on them. Those who can create and sell closed species are limited by their creators. Primogens are perhaps the most well-known example of a closed species, though of course others do exist. And closed species can prove extremely divisive due to questions about artistic control, death of the author, and, again, copyright that they raise. Protogens. Protogens are perhaps the most popular open species online right now. They're a super common fursona, seen as fursuits in virtual reality, in art, and so on. They were created in 2017 by Cool Koinu as a part of Zenith's Outer Reach, or ZOR, a sci-fi setting of their creation. They started ZOR with their first public original species, the Primogen, a closed species whose sale was discontinued in 2019. In the FAQ on Koinu's site, they mentioned that they don't wish to continue contributing to the discourse around closed species, which started to crop up around that time. Primogens were followed not long after by Protogens, their open sibling species, also from ZOR. Protogens are a synthetic mammalian species created for planetary and space exploration. They're a mix of biomechanical parts, with perhaps the most defining feature being their electronic visor face. There is a huge guide regarding lore and rules available for free from Cool Koinu. Protogens are popular due to the number of retextures available for their models in VR, as well as the inventive methods used for protogen fursuiting. Also because they're just kind of cute. Like, seriously, who doesn't like protogens? Comment below if you don't like protogens. Pokesonas. Pokesonas are fursonas based on pre-existing Pokemon species. Similar to how fursonas are selected, Pokesonas can be based on your favorite Pokemon, a species with which you identify, or honestly, any reason. I couldn't find concrete data on how far back this idea goes, but the original Urban Dictionary entry dates to 2011, so for at least more than a decade, Pokesonas have been a thing online. Otherwise, this is pretty straightforward all things considered. Just make a fursona based off of a Pokemon species. Additionally, similar types of sonas can come from Digimon and other series with original species in them. AI art. AI art is any art generated not by humans, but by artificial intelligence, and with minor input from humans. Generally, this means that the AI only has direction from the human in the form of a verbal prompt or a collection of images which might be combined into a single piece. AI art can take the form of multiple mediums, but most commonly when you hear someone refer to AI art, they're talking about static visual media. AI art has existed in various forms since the 1960s, but gained a lot of steam in 2015 with Google's launch of Deep Dream, an AI art generator. The concept hit something of a fever pitch in the early 2020s with the release of many AI bots from numerous companies and groups, more or less back-to-back. Everyone who didn't initially know how these things actually gathered the data from which they generate their images seemed to just kind of think, huh, that's pretty neat. I know I did. And that continued for a couple of months or maybe a year. However, in 2022, it started to become more widespread knowledge that a lot of these AI bots are designed to trawl the web for publicly available images and to cobble them together in sort of a collage. After all, the bot needs some sort of input, because if you give it a visual prompt, it needs to have some sort of base of knowledge to interpret that prompt into a visual image and create something quote-unquote new. Once this became widespread public knowledge, the issue became, did anyone actually give their consent to have their copyrighted images used by these bots? AI art is a super contentious issue right now, and it's relevant in furry because of the multiple sites from which this data was scraped being heavily populated by furries. In other words, a lot of furry art got caught up in the mix. It's also relevant because so many furries make some amount of income from their art, especially on the internet, meaning they were one of the first groups to really publicly raise an outcry about more or less having their work stolen. Again, it's still super contentious in terms of who owns the copyright on the images that are generated, because no sort of precedent for this thing exists yet, and not a lot of headway is being made in terms of concessions for the artists whose work is being used. VRChat. VRChat is a social media platform / video game? Designed with virtual reality headsets in mind, though it notably can be played in desktop mode with a mouse and keyboard or a controller. It was launched for Windows and Oculus in 2014, ported to Steam and the HTC Vive in 2017, and the Meta Quest, or I guess at the time the Oculus Quest, but now it's the Meta Quest, it's so confusing, in 2018, with Quest 2 support coming later in a limited capacity. VRChat is developed by VRChat Incorporated, and serves as a social media platform popular among various groups. But let's be honest, it's mainly weebs, furries, and screaming children. This demographic split is frankly so real that it's to the point that it's kind of a meme that if you're ever on a public world in VRC, you're gonna run into screaming children. Also to the point that news articles question the lack of safeguards for children from adult content in VRC, which, if you're handing a kid a $400 minimum VR headset and not paying attention to what they're doing with it, that kind of sounds like a parenting skill issue to me. I don't know if you have the right to be mad at VRChat for that. VRChat is notable in furry because of how well it translates the idea of becoming your fursona in a relatively cheap manner, meaning that you're spending hundreds of dollars, in a lot of cases, on a headset so that you can sort of become your fursona, rather than spending thousands of dollars to buy a fursuit. Thanks to how almost all content in VRChat is community generated, you can even have your own worlds, your own character models, retextures of existing character models, and so on. It's definitely led to the popularity of certain species, see the Protogen earlier, as well as the creation of new species entirely, which we'll talk about in a bit. It's also well known for its versatility of application. It contains a stream camera, which can then be chroma keyed, offering an on-the-fly VTuber model if you want. But that's just scratching the surface of the capabilities of VRChat for networking or for streaming or whatever you want to do with it. What's more, VRChat streams are super popular on furry Twitch, with endless possibilities for what could happen. But let's be honest, most of these streams are just people with full body tracking laying around talking to each other. And I'm here for it. Taidums. The Taidum is an original species which actually came from VRChat and was created by Erix. Erix mentioned on Twitter when someone said that they originally called Taidums axolotls because they didn't know what they were called, that this was similar to the original name, but that the name Taidum was decided upon because it was similar to their dog's name. In a lot of ways, they do look like just little aquatic otter boinky boofs. Taidums are notable because they're free and open for use in any sort of media, commercial or otherwise, meaning they've been a super popular pick for VTubers, VRChat content creators, and more, even moving out of VR and into traditional art. DTD. DTD is short for duct tape dummy. It's the simplest, most precise method for acquiring one's measurements for a custom fursuit. Basically, a fursuit itself needs to account for the volume, height, width, and depth a person will occupy inside of it. It's not like a cut of fabric where it merely needs to sit on the body with certain measurements. It's more like a glove where it needs to allow the perfect amount of room. In the case of like a jacket or some pants, you might get away with tailoring something, but with a fursuit, once that baby is put together, the fursuit makers, comment below. I've never tried to make one, much less modify one. How difficult would that theoretically be after the fact, if you got the measurements wrong? A duct tape dummy is achieved by layering up your body with plastic wrap, which is then covered with the duct tape. The plastic protects your skin from the duct tape's potentially harmful chemicals, and the tape will remain rigid. Once a sufficient amount of tape has been applied to your body, the skin-tight bodysuit is cut off, leaving behind a hollow mannequin around which the fursuit may be built. So basically, it's a perfect custom-built mannequin. Once you have your dummy, it's shipped to the fursuit maker, who uses it to construct the suit itself. This makes the process a lot more precise than with eyeballed or even measured measurements. I was unable to find specific data on how long duct tape dummies have been used, but I did find reference in 2008 to a clothes maker's tutorial about how to make one, given that duct tape dummies also have applications beyond just fursuiting, for example in cosplay. Telegram. Telegram is more or less the social media platform of choice for furries. It's an application that allows direct messages and chat rooms. And seriously, if you see a Telegram link in someone's bio, there's a solid chance that they're a furry. It launched in 2013 and allows for text, voice, file sharing, and so on. It's kind of similar to WhatsApp and other independent messaging apps. Also, it predates Discord by 2 years. Perhaps the most notable thing about Telegram and why it took off so strongly with furries, though, is that it allows the usage of custom stickers, something that Discord doesn't even allow you to do unless you purchase their paid upgrade, Nitro. Probably for this reason, and probably just because there was a solid install base in the first place, Telegram has retained its popularity to this day among furries. Furry YouTubers. Furry YouTubers are, simply put, content creators that make furry content on YouTube. They're a very common point for people to find the fandom nowadays, with numerous big names like Majira Strawberry, Kiwi, Beta Eta Delota, Fluke Husky, Glitch, and more. This category could also include YouTube creators who are furries but whose content isn't explicitly furry, like Adam from Your Movie Sucks, where it's just common knowledge that they're a furry and they sometimes talk about it, but the majority of their content has nothing to do with furry. Like we mentioned on Layer 1, many YouTubers are either VTubers, fursuiters, or both, though obviously this isn't always the case, with in most cases their fursona being their avatar for their YouTube channel. NASA tweets. NASA tweets refers to how, back in 2018, one Naomi H received a NASA internship and posted about it on Twitter. One Homer Hickam replied, saying, "Language." To which Naomi replied, "Suck my dick and balls, I'm working at NASA." To which Homer replied, "And I am on the National Space Council that oversees NASA." This became a pretty big meme at the time, spawning its own meme format, and probably also because Naomi lost the internship as a result of this. In a video covering the whole thing by Beta Eta Delota, which I'll link below, you should check it out, he goes into pretty good detail about this. He explains that Homer Hickam wrote a blog post after the fact concerning the incident, and how, 1, he had nothing to do with Naomi losing the internship, and 2, how she reached out to him with an apology after the incident. He then tried to help her get the internship back, which I'm not sure where that ended exactly, because after this, it's a private matter. And honestly, the whole thing was kind of a private matter that became a public thing, and is often considered just a piece of internet drama and a source of the meme format I mentioned before. And frankly, when I was doing research for this, I had no idea. This whole incident inspires some pretty strong emotions from people on both sides of the argument as to whether or not Naomi deserved to lose her internship. Lil Nas X. Lil Nas X is the American rapper who is probably most well known for his 2019 hit Old Town Road, specifically the remix featuring Billy Ray Cyrus, though in the years since, he's done a lot of other music. His music's good. His music's good. What can I say? The reason Lil Nas X is of interest to furries, however, is that in July 2020, Lil Nas X tweeted that, "I want a fursuit," directed at SonicFox. To which the maker, Sarah Cat, responded offering her services. And Lil Nas X said, "Let's do it." And then SonicFox got in on the thread. It was a good time for everybody. However, in 2021, he posted a TikTok wearing a fursuit. And then things got worse. Multiple creators pointed out that the suit he was wearing was a bootleg of an existing fursuit, namely the one worn by Malo Wolf. Once this was pointed out to Lil Nas X, he responded, "I don't know where to get a custom one." As a result of this, people started dragging him on Twitter and bringing up his original reply to Sarah Cat. In a lot of cases, going on to screenshot more tweets from July 2020 from Sarah Cat detailing their lack of communication. So, this is stage 1 of the drama. And many people took this to mean that Lil Nas X was trying to get popular in the fandom, but that he didn't want to actually be a part of the fandom. Like, he didn't want to do the work or contribute. However, part 2 happened another year later, in October 2022, when Lil Nas X recognized the above-mentioned SonicFox at one of his concerts. He shouted them out in the crowd, and then invited them on stage in fursuit. This was seen in the Twitter discourse sphere as another grab at furries as an quote-unquote untapped market, as many people came to call it, to which Lil Nas X distanced himself from the fandom. I don't know. This whole thing is just a mess, and a lot of it feels like hearsay, and a lot of people would comment things like Lil Nas X is big enough and online enough that he should know better than to buy a bootleg suit, and instead he should be contributing to the fandom, at least financially. What do you think in the comments below? Adoptables. Adoptables are, once again, not exclusively a furry concept, but are very popular with furries. These are original characters made by an artist and then sold or auctioned, similar to a YCH. However, with a YCH, you're using an original character that's already in existence, whereas an adoptable is a character you can take on, with pre-established design, if not name, backstory, and so on. Adoptables are sometimes sold with stipulations, somewhat similar to an original species. For instance, you can't change the name, if you resell, it has to be below this certain value, things like that. Basically, buying an adoptable is purchasing a character. Sometimes closed species will be sold in batches of adoptables, and that's the only way to get them. Adoptables can be used in this particular instance to control the population of a species directly, or they can be used in a more general sense as an entry point for some people who feel they don't have the creative drive to fully flesh out a character all their own. As per usual on this layer, adoptables are a source of controversy and very heated discourse for some, who feel that people buying adoptables are basically just saying that they want to be in the fandom with minimal effort, or who feel that the artists who sell adoptables are being lazy and trying to cash in. But I don't know, it took me several years before I developed the character of Princess Dank and really settled on who I wanted this character to be. Personally, I can understand if you feel like you're kind of in a creative rut and you just can't come up with a character. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Popufurs. As the term would imply, Popufurs are popular furries. The term was coined at least as far back as 2007. Again, if not earlier, that's just the earliest known example right now, to describe people with a certain level of clout within the fandom. It was popularized by a performance by the troupe Furry Night Live of the same name, Popufur, held at Further Confusion 2009. For reference, Furry Night Live was a variety show held at Duck-On until 2000, when MFF was founded and split off from the furry track at Duck-On. For reference, refer to the Midwest Furfest entry on Layer 1. And the variety show, Furry Night Live, did not move with Midwest Furfest away from Duck-On, and instead moved to Further Confusion. In other words, the term Popufur is applied to the people whose names you may know off of the top of your head, just for being fans in the fandom. In fact, a lot of the YouTube creators I mentioned before have had this label applied to them over time. And unsurprisingly, a lot of people who may be described this way take ingress with the term itself. Of course, I am not speaking for any or all of them. That is for them to do. But discourse does exist around the efficacy and meaning of the term Popufur. Some use it as a general, neutral term, but in recent years, I can find a lot more cases of it taking on a more negative meaning, describing furry fans with enough clout and enough of a following to maintain an air of superiority over their followers, or who might use their clout to silence detractors. So, in that case, I can definitely see why somebody would not want to be called a Popufur. How do you take this term, though? Yiff in Hell. Yiff in Hell is a popular refrain used by anti-furries since at least the early 2000s, or perhaps earlier, and mostly popularized by 4chan. The phrase was originally associated with an image of Robin Hood in a burning castle from the climax of the 1973 film. Though it's a relatively old phrase at this point, it's remained in usage for quite some time, even serving as the name of a fairly popular subreddit that we'll be discussing at some point. As with most early 2000s internet culture associated with image boards, it's not known exactly who came up with this phrase or when it first was used. Helluva Boss. Helluva Boss is an animated series created by VRChat, revolving around a startup in Hell that specializes in assassination, and known as IMP, Immediate Murder Professionals. The animated show has had 2 seasons between 2020 and 2022, after a pilot which aired in 2019. Helluva Boss is notable for its popularity and accessibility thanks to being published on YouTube, not on a traditional television channel. VRChat has been on YouTube under this moniker since 2012, amassing almost 8 million subs as of this recording, with tens of millions of views on every episode of this show so far. But what about Furry? Helluva Boss is notable thanks to the receptionist character Luna being a hellhound, who has amassed a dedicated following, let's just say. SonicFox. SonicFox, aka SonicFox 5000, is a professional fighting games player who's won 6 EVO championships, including wins in Injustice, Mortal Kombat 10, Dragon Ball FighterZ, Mortal Kombat 11, and Skullgirls, as well as participating competitively in tons of other fighting games. They've been into fighting games since they were 13 years old, and they gained championship momentum in 2014. They've also been into furry since about 10 or 11, saying that they started wearing fox ears to game tournaments to gain confidence and hype while playing around 16. At this point, SonicFox sometimes even wears fursuits to competitions. They're known for being a recognizable face for furry in somewhat mainstream media, as well as a non-binary person breaking into the public consciousness of America. Poodling. Poodling is the act of wearing fursuit hands, head, and feet without the suit to match, creating a display as though one's sona has been shaved like a poodle. This leads to showing human clothing or even skin, which has created discourse in the fursuiting community. This is thanks to the idea that poodling ruins the magic of fursuiting. A Twitter account bearing the name Poodling was created in 2017, with a resurgence in this piece of discourse in the early 2020s. It's sometimes done for comfort, to prevent overheating, strain from the weight of a full suit, and so on, or sometimes due to a lack of funding for a full suit. Often the contention on the opposite side of those claiming that it ruins the magic is that to talk down on poodling is inherently elitist, or at least classist, given the amount of money involved in purchasing full suits. Now, take basically everything I just said with a grain of sand, because poodling is notable for being a piece of discourse that may or may not even exist. It may have been completely blown out of proportion by several individuals reacting to a smaller number of individuals who have a negative opinion of poodling, leading to the perception that this discourse is more widespread than it actually is. But again, ain't that social media for you? It's also notable for being covered by this VRChat post, as well as a ton of videos from 2019 covering the topic. The suspicious thing to me is that in the replies to the VRChat question, you can see a lot of people who take issue with poodling. This VRChat post was made right around the time tons of YouTube content creators started commenting on poodling, in videos giving their opinions of the subject. So, the question is, was this all just some sort of misunderstanding that them asking the question meant that it was an issue? Or was this the small number of people in the replies who actually have an issue with it getting replied to by tons of people who don't have an issue with it? Again, like I said, take basically anything about poodling with a grain of salt, because it's not even known if this is really a problem. Beast Wars. Beast Wars was the 1996 to 1999 CGI spin-off of Transformers, set 300 years after the original show, with the gimmick being that the two factions, the Maximals and the Predacons, transform into beast forms rather than vehicles, as did the original Transformers. It received several of its own anime and comic spin-offs and sequels over the coming years, as well as a sequel, Beast Machines, in 1999 to 2000. Beast Wars began airing 2 years after Reboot, the first full-scale CG animated show on TV. Beast Wars is notable here for its introduction of 90s kids to the idea of anthropomorphic animals. It's also notable for blending anthro with transformation, which probably led to some things later on. Masquerade. A masquerade is a commonly held event at FurCons, featuring entertainment provided by attendees of the convention. It's also common at anime, among other types of conventions. Think of it as similar to a talent show, but in this case, it's exclusively furry, of course. You might have a musical act, then a stand-up routine, then a comedic skit, and then back to another musician or a dance number. Sometimes masquerades are called variety shows instead of masquerades, with the term masquerade more recently being reserved instead for what is the equivalent of a fursuit fashion show. This shift in the usage of the word masquerade is also present in anime conventions, where sometimes a masquerade will mean a talent show, and other times it will mean a cosplay fashion show. This evolution of the term seems to be pretty common, as far as I can tell. BNA. BNA is the 2020 anime by Studio Trigger, who also created Kill la Kill and others. It's notable as the second part of that 1-2, maybe 3 punch of furry anime on Netflix alongside Beastars. It revolves around beastmen, who are people capable of transforming into anthro animals, and their relations with humans. The title is short for Brand New Animal. This one is notable not just for furry weeb cross-pollination, but for being one of the standout anthro anime of the 2020s so far. Fursuit Bowling. Fursuit Bowling is an activity common to local fur meets. I mentioned in Layer 1, when we talked about fur meets, that they aren't always house affairs, and may include public gatherings. Well, bowling is one of those things that people settled on as a common activity. It's essentially the act of bowling in fursuit. You just get a group of fursuiters together, you go to the bowling alley, and you play a couple games. It's so popular, in fact, that regional fursuit bowling competitions are organized in multiple different countries. It honestly seems like it would probably be exceptionally difficult, but I wouldn't be opposed to trying it at some point. It seems like it could be pretty fun. Furality. Furality is, as far as I can tell, the first virtual reality convention not designed to replace an in-person con. Its full name is Furality Online Experience, or FOX, and its mascot is Finn, whose name stands for Furality Yottabyte Neural Network, Finn being an AI fox to represent the digital nature of the convention. It's a convention which is exclusive to VRChat, which was first held on May 22nd through 24th, 2020. Donations were gathered from attendees and donated to Save a Fox Rescue, a Minnesota rescue for, well, foxes. Each subsequent convention run by Furality Inc., which was incorporated July 2020, has amassed thousands in donations for Save a Fox. There were 2 conventions in 2020, 2 in 2021, 1 in 2022, which was, may I note, the largest furry convention ever, even beating out Midwest Fur Fest 2022, and 1 mini convention in 2023, with the next full con coming this June. It grew from 2,692 attendees at Furality 2020 to 15,079 attendees for Furality Aqua in June 2022. It's definitely a ton of fun, and you should check it out if you have a PC that can run VRC. As, again, the game can run in desktop or VR mode, so you don't technically need a VR headset in order to attend Furality. Rule 34. Rule 34 is the 34th rule of the internet. If it exists, there is porn of it. No exceptions. And boy, has that proven true. Though, part of me does wonder if it's true partially because Rule 34 exists. Like, would there be porn of everything if people weren't baited by the rule itself? Does Rule 34 being a meme mean that people are driven to make porn of things which otherwise may not have had it? It's interesting, though. The idea was conceived back in 2003, again, maybe earlier, but that's the earliest version we know of, in webcomic form from the site zoomout.co.uk, and the meme gained popularity on image and message boards around the same time. Naturally, this rule extends to furry and furry-adjacent media. A lot of us back then were probably exposed to NSFW material from our favorite cartoons and shows and whatnot, and this is part of why. This is the explanation for it. So, of course, Rule 34 is furry culture. The Fursona Starter Pack. The Fursona Starter Pack can be one of two concepts. Either it is a Fursona application of the meme format of a starter pack, which details all the basic concepts and aesthetics that one might use for their first Fursona. Patterning, hairstyle, aesthetic, species, and so on. Or this concept from late 2022 detailed by Beta Eta Delota in one of his videos regarding a set of particular Fursona avatars that appear regularly on social media, particularly among young furries who don't yet have their own Sonas. His video goes over attempting to find the original artists for the pieces in question, and it's a good watch, so go check it out, it'll be linked below. Since that video was published, this idea has retained a degree of relevance, with more awareness about these avatars leading to conversations publicly on their common usage. X is secretly a furry. This is a somewhat popular point of speculation for celebrities, specifically online creators, more specifically YouTube creators, of course. Some of the best examples for this would be Dan Avidan of Game Grumps and Ninja Sex Party, and James, aka The Odd Ones Out. Over the years, both of these guys have made a lot of comments and content which may suggest they're quote-unquote secretly furries. Though in Dan's case, it honestly seems more likely that he's just not realizing the label could be applied to him, at least from what I've seen. Whereas James, from The Odd Ones Out, has just straight up fursuited in certain content before. X is secretly a furry is on this iceberg thanks to how much rumor and attention this concept receives whenever brought up about anybody, frankly. Sometimes these rumors will last literal years on end, even becoming part of the lore and mystique of that creator. Species contractions. A species contraction is a piece of furspeak or furspeech, which condenses the names of common species into single phrases. Some of these can look kind of indecipherable if you don't know what you're looking at, but they're an easy indicator that, again, someone's probably a furry. If someone has a Telegram username in their bio and uses words like the ones we're about to talk about, probably a furry. I mean, would a normie call me a yeen? Maybe, but probably not. Other super common ones include Snep for snow leopard, Yote for coyote, G-Shep for German shepherd, Durg for dragon, Dad for Dutch angel dragon, and of course, Bun for Banui. These aren't always furry, of course, but come on, who that isn't a furry knows what a snep is? Unless you're watching this and you're not a furry, then I guess you know what a snep is now, but... Headless Lounge. A headless lounge is a room at a convention designed specifically as a place for fursuiters to take off parts of their suit, especially the head, to cool off and relax. They're generally maintained away from the convention space for the sake of maintaining the magic of suiting in public spaces. In other words, this is like where you're allowed to break character. They're a convention staple, more or less, and referring back to an earlier entry, headless lounges are used by those who take issue with poodling as a reason that poodling shouldn't be a problem. In other words, fursuiters have a place to unwind, so they should do it in there, not on the main con floor. Generally, headless lounges are extremely cooled rooms. as the purpose is to help people regulate their temperature, and may include craft tools for the sake of quick repairs. Similar rooms exist in some other conventions for the sake of cosplayers, but headless lounges are a mainstay for furcons. Your Name the Hedgehog. Your Name the Hedgehog is the meme and concept that simply typing your name and then the hedgehog will yield some original character result on Google Images. This is thanks to, as said in Layer 1, the popularity of Sonic with furries, and creative people not necessarily into furry alike. And while most characters in Sonic may represent single species, the most popular species for OCs is by far the hedgehog. This means that virtually any common name should yield at the very least one result for a Sonic original character. It's a popular enough meme that from 2010 onward, people have made a pastime of performing the search and posting their results, or else doing it via social media with friends. Egyptian gods. Egyptian gods are just, there's so much fur bait. Holy shit. Not to mention avian bait and scaly bait, but being pantheistic, and given that their history stretched longer from start to finish than the number of years that have passed since the Empire's collapse to today, yeah, think about that for a minute. There are tons of different ancient Egyptian gods to choose from, and quite often, these gods were depicted as having human bodies and anthropomorphized animal features. Of course, you likely know Anubis, the jackal god of the dead, Ra, the falcon god of the sun, Sobek, the crocodile god of fertility, Bast, the cat goddess of cats, but the list goes on, frankly. The point of this being here, though, while you may look at this as a modern-day appreciation for these anthropomorphized beings, with their associated animals being tied through said anthropomorphization to the qualities the Egyptians saw them to represent, in truth, the only difference going on here is that modern furries don't see the formalized fandom as a religion. In other words, the Egyptians who bought into these gods were absolutely the ancient equivalent of furries, and I will not be taking questions on this. This is what I meant all the way back in the intro of this series when I said the fandom has been around properly for about 40 years, but that this phenomenon spans basically all of recorded history. Really makes me wonder if any of the imperial scribes ever shitposted on papyrus rolls about how cringe and gross the pharaoh was for being a furry. RainFurrest. Oh boy. RainFurrest was a convention which ran from 2007 to 2015 in Washington State, with a 2016 and 2017 edition announced and then canceled, and the convention formally closed on February 28, 2017. RainFurrest is notorious as a meme online due to what many have called the disaster that was RainFurrest 2015. There are plenty of videos that go into full detail on the matter already on this website, but suffice to say, that particular convention resulted in various adult activities that became scandalous on social media, as well as vandalism to the host hotel, which the hotel later claimed in an open letter to the convention it had sustained more or less year after year. The interesting thing to me when I was researching this is that the adult content is not brought up by the host hotel in their letter at all. That seems to mainly have been a social media phenomenon, to talk about the adult things going on in public. The host hotel, though, at least publicly, was really just taking issue with the vandalism. This became such a talking point that Fred Patton, among others, got in on the discussion around the time that RainFurrest dissolved. And almost a decade later, the name is still associated almost solely with that final, by most accounts, disastrous year, rather than any of the other years that the convention was held. Honestly, I had never even heard of most of the other years prior to this. Hazbin Hotel. Hazbin Hotel is an earlier work by VRChat than Helluva Boss, with a pilot premiering on her YouTube page in 2019. Hazbin Hotel actually spun off into Helluva Boss the following year, and was picked up by A24 for a full series, with VRChat noting in late 2021 that the series would premiere properly before long. Hazbin Hotel is also set in Hell, centering instead on a hotel run by the Princess of Hell. It's notable not only for spawning the later series, but also for, like Helluva Boss, including a diverse cast in terms of gender and sexuality. It's also notable for having multiple characters that are arguably some flavor of anthro, though admittedly not as full-on as Luna. Greymuzzles. Greymuzzle is a term applied to older members of the furry fandom based on one or two criteria, arguably. either physical age or perhaps more commonly, someone who has been in the fandom for a long time. This could mean anything, of course, because it's completely subjective. When the term was first coined in the 90s, it was used to refer to those in the fandom who had been a part of the community since prior to the internet, specifically those who were a part of the original groups and publications from the fandom, or those who participated in networked multi-user text-based games based around furry, which...
More on that later.
However, as the period I'm referring to is now almost 30 years in the past, the term is instead now used more commonly to refer to people who have been in the fandom for a certain amount of time, which, again, is completely arbitrary based on who's speaking. Some choose to apply the label to themselves, while others have it applied by others. Very recently, there's been a lot of discussion on social media about ageism in the fandom, particularly where younger furs wish to distance themselves from older furs, which in turn has led to some knee-jerk reaction from older furs explaining that they basically don't want to hang out with young children anyway, which, okay. We can all be a part of this fandom and just kind of occupy our own space, right? Like, it's a big fandom at this point. I don't know, I guess I just don't personally get it, as ageist divides are common coming from older and younger people throughout all of human history. I mean, getting into my 30s at this point, I have plenty of friends who have started talking shit about teenagers, and I don't know, okay. Regardless, the term greymuzzle is one that you'll see regularly, often as a neutral term, and occasionally as a pejorative coming from younger furs. Though, admittedly, the latter case is rare. Aggretsuko. Aggretsuko is the third part of that 1, 2, 3 Netflix furry anime punch that we've been talking about, which... Oh wait, hold on. I'm getting a call here.
Hey Princess, it's Abysme. Just finished the first part of your Ultimate Furry Fandom Iceberg video. Loved it, really cool. If I don't see Animorphs somewhere in this video series, I may not like and subscribe. Do not test me. Okay, bye.
Oh, what's this? Well, I guess the last season just came out, so, I should probably watch that before we talk about it here. And I really don't want to get kneecapped by Abysme, so, I guess we're talking about Animorphs instead. Animorphs. Animorphs was a series of 54 sequential books with 10 spin-offs, all published from 1996 to 2001, and penned by K.A. Applegate, a pseudonym for Catherine Applegate and husband Michael Grant. Animorphs centers on a group of terminally 90s teenagers, let's be honest, who come across a crash-landed alien who, in its dying moments, gives the children the power to transform into animals with which they've come into contact. The kids are then entrusted with using these new powers to combat another race of aliens, who are described as slugs which enter and assume control of other sentient hosts. In this case, any possible human with which the kids interact. This means that they have to hide their identities as they search for more information on the alien races in question and attempt to save Earth from being taken over by space slugs. Admittedly, I completely slept on these books when I was a kid and a teenager, but I did listen to the first few in audiobook form a few years back, and Jesus Christ, are they dark. Minor spoilers here, but I only got a few books in, so this is not like late series material here. In the first few books, one of the kids overstays their welcome because they have limited time in animal form and is permanently stuck as an animal. And the books immediately after deal directly with them coming to terms with their mind slowly turning into that of a beast, as well as the other kids trying to protect the truth from the rest of the town in which they live. From everything I can tell, it's seriously good stuff, though admittedly I only listened to the first 5 or 6 books, I don't quite remember. And frankly, I can 100% see why this was a solid entry point for 90s and 2000s kids into the fandom. Catboys. Catboys are the male equivalent of catgirls, who we talked about in Layer 1. Catboys are separated here because while catgirls have been popular for a lot of recorded history, as we went over, catboys are a much more recent phenomenon. To reuse a phrase that I literally just used, catboys have been slept on for most of recorded history. But they started to gain popularity in mid to late 2020, peaking in July 2021, though not as high as the peak 17 years earlier, on July 21st, 2004. What did 2004 know about catboys that was not rediscovered for 17 years? I have to know. The video game Nekopada Catboys Paradise arrived in July 2021, likely spurred on by this interest and probably resulting in some of this peak that you see here. Catboys in meme culture are often associated with French maid outfits, potentially as a result of the memes surrounding the Animal Crossing character Raymond, whom it became popular to dress in this manner in 2020 and 2021. Honestly, what can I say? This is what the ideal male body looks like. And that's that. Fursuit Parade. A fursuit parade is another common element of furry conventions, which consists of many fursuiters as wish to participate, lining up and parading around the convention space. It's likely popular due to the spectacle which it often provides, especially given how large furcons have gotten in the last decade or so. The first fursuit parade occurred in 1997 at Albany Anthrocon, and was organized by Yappy Slyfox for the benefit of the dealers in the dealer's den. This was because the dealers didn't get to properly attend the convention since they had to tend to their tables, and Yappy wanted them to be able to at least see some sort of show, especially considering how many fursuiters were present at that convention. Though we're not sure how many suitors participated in early parades. Since the numbers have started to be recorded in 2006, the events have ranged from a little more than 200 suitors in the 2006
further confusion
to more than 2,500 in the 2022 Anthrocon parade. However, these parades don't just happen at Anthrocon. Those are just the ones that we have easy numbers for over that long of a period of time. They very quickly became a mainstay of many furcons. It's definitely something that you want to check out if you've never seen one. What's this? What's this is the follow-up to the phrase, oh whoa, which I covered on layer 1. It's derived from the first known usage of oh whoa, as well as the derogatory webcomic edit that we also mentioned in the oh whoa entry. It morphed from there into a copypasta common from about 2017 onward, which increased in popularity from 2018 onward due to its adaptation into a rap. The copypasta prominently begins with the phrase, oh whoa, what's this? It was likely written to capitalize on the absurdity of furry communication, particularly in furspeak or furspeech, and particularly in roleplay. Whether it was good-natured or mean-spirited, who knows? In other words, while oh whoa can be its own thing, using the phrase oh whoa what's this more or less always means you're referring to said copypasta at this point. And just like oh whoa, what's this is used ironically and seriously alike for many people. It's another one of those examples where if this copypasta was meant to be derogatory, it got embraced and adopted by furries. PNG tubers. PNG tubers are a subset of VTubers, which we talked about in layer 1, who use static PNG images, PNG being a file format that allows for transparency, to represent themselves. This eschews the need for any kind of 3D model, rigging, anything like that. PNG tubing is also made super simple with the use of the free program VRChat Mini, which is available over on itch.io and was developed by Olmewe, initially released in January 2021, with updates ever since. It's a super lightweight program named after the Portuguese word for deer, hence the mascot being a deer. Also, a recent post on their site regarding the name, which apparently is a homonym for a slur for gay people in Portuguese, stated that if you use this program, you're gay. So, literally every PNG tuber I know is gay, apparently. PNG tubing can provide a less fussy version of VTubing, especially on a budget, given how all one needs is a minimum of 2 pieces of static art to get going. Hell, you only really need 1, if we're being honest. It's good stuff, which applies to furry thanks to how many furry VTubers are either solely PNG tubers or have an alternative PNG tuber setup in their arsenal, kinda like me. Dance competitions. Dance competitions are a more and more frequent event at furry conventions. Basically, they're competitions for dances in fursuit. Again, this seems exceptionally difficult, if you ask me. I mean, I'm so uncoordinated, I can't dance in the first place, so props to anyone who goes the extra step and doesn't just choreograph and perform dances, but does so in suit. This type of event was formalized at Furry Week in Atlanta in 2008, then closely followed at Anthrocon 2008, and since then has become a common convention event. Fursuit dance competitions have grown and flourished super quick, and they definitely deserve recognition for that. According to this article by Gail Frostbane on Fang, Feather, and Fin, in 1993, at Conference 4, fursuiters were recorded dancing in the Masquerade, or talent show, Dancing in Fursuit. Frostbane points to the popularity of choreographed boy band and girl band dances in the late 90s and early 2000s to making fursuit dancing more of a thing. Of course, Frostbane explains that dancing in fursuits at raves and so on was definitely a thing, and that the overall interest in fursuit dancing led to these first competitions in 2008. In fact, the entire competition from Furry Week in Atlanta is archived on YouTube on the channel Spike Pap, who also archived the 2008 Anthrocon competition. Frostbane explains that by 2014, over 30 conventions were holding fursuit dance competitions, with the phenomenon spreading overseas by 2011. If you're interested in checking out more, I suggest you take a look at any number of videos available on YouTube, because there are so many posted publicly, with archival efforts from each convention only getting stronger as time goes on. And, of course, check out Gail Frostbane's article, which was instrumental in writing this entry on the iceberg. Also, as an addendum to this entry, after writing and recording it initially, I learned that the first events at Furry Week in Atlanta 2008 and Anthrocon 2008 were organized by JD Puppy, Theomi, and Malo Wolf. I couldn't find this information anywhere online previously, so I got in touch with Brenda Banks, a major player in the fursuit dance world for years now, and she pointed me in the direction of JD Puppy and Theomi. JD Puppy confirmed for me that he and Theomi were in charge of the Anthrocon event, but not the Furry Week in Atlanta event. So I then got in touch with Malo Wolf, the current head of the dance competition at Furry Week in Atlanta, who explained that he was the one that brought the competition to Furry Week in Atlanta in the first place. So in addition to Gail Frostbane, big thanks to Brenda Banks, JD Puppy, and Malo Wolf for helping me to clear this up. Perhaps this is something we could dive into deeper at another time. How these two events in 2008 materialized in the first place and kicked off this lengthy tradition. And that's going to wrap it up for Layer 2 of the Mega Furry Fandom Iceberg. Thank you all for watching another layer, or if this is your first, be sure to check out the previous layer. Each layer should stand on its own, but admittedly things are only going to get more obscure and older in a lot of cases from here. If you want to hang around, you can check out some of my other videos, you can check out my streams over on Twitch, or my music if you want to support it. The response to the first video in this series was colossal compared to what I was expecting, and this is admittedly mostly a vanity project. I'm creating something because it didn't exist in the form I was seeking. So it really does mean a lot to me that it connected with so many of you. Thank you all for your kind words, the corrections that were pointed out and will be implemented later, and the suggestions for further entries. That being said, if you got more suggestions for going further down the rabbit hole, remember that this is what I'm calling a living iceberg. And until the final mega cut is done, there is always room to add more entries. So please drop them below, and if they're pertinent, they'll probably get put in and you'll get a shout out for it. Let's be honest, we might even do additional layers later on, depending on how much input this gets over time. Beyond that, drop a subscribe, because if you thought this layer was a little bit spicy, you're in for a treat with Layer 3 in April. You have no idea what's coming. I guess you do know that Aggretsuko is coming. And once again, a special thanks this time around to Brenda Banks, JD Puppy, Malo Wolf, and Gail Frostbane for their massive assistance on the Fursuit dance competition entry. It would not have ended up the way it did without their help. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day.